Today we've got some amazing guests to introduce to you. Some of you will know them very well. Some of you might be new to you. But let me ask you to give a very warm Spring Harvest welcome to the founder of Care for the Family, Mr. Rob Parsons. Rob, you are one of the busiest people I know. You are travelling all around the country, inspiring Christians to take the family seriously. Many of us have been at your events. How do you possibly make time to read? When do you find the time?
I absolutely love reading. And I find one of the tougher things about being busy, and I'm sure we're all busy, is keeping that inner flame alive. And so I literally make time to read. But I also find it rejuvenating. And you know, Krish, I would read one book for just one good idea. And I often do. And I find that helps. It feeds the ministry. Somebody said to me years ago, when you're involved in ministry, and whether it's one-to-one or larger, the well needs to be deeper than the bucket. That's good, isn't it? The well needs to be deeper than the bucket. So good books, I think, do that for you.
Very good. I like this idea that you might only find one big idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can find that in the first chapter. Does that mean you don't bother reading the rest of the book?
No, you can. But I think it makes it worthwhile. And I think it's not just true about books. I would go to a seminar or an event just for one good idea, because I think that can change your life. And the reason I write and the reason I read is I believe books are literally life-changing.
Wow. Could you tell us about one of the books that you've got with you that's helped you?
Well, I suppose this is the book that changed my life. It was 1984. Perhaps one of the very lowest moments of my life. And somebody gave me a book by Lewis Smeets called How Can Everything Be All Right When Everything's All Wrong? And he just talked about that time of life where it seems that God is not fair, that heaven is like brass, that you've had a rough deal, and perhaps emotionally you're at a real low and you find it hard to cope. And Lewis Smeets talked about grace and joy and I just found it revolutionary, Krish. And I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today if it hadn't been for that book. So it went out of print, and some years ago the publishers brought it back out, and they brought it out as Rob Parsons, the book that changed my life. But actually it's Lewis Smeets' book. I wrote a 2,000-word introduction.
Tell us how that got to you, though. How did someone give that to you? How do they know you? What was the relationship?
Do you know, the funny thing about books that sometimes change our lives is we just pick them up. And I honestly think I just picked that one up. And I began flicking through it. And you know, sometimes you listen to a piece of music or you look at a painting and it just captures your heart. Sometimes in the first look or the first sound or the first few sentences. And that's what it did for me. Smeets begins with a man in hospital and he's dying of cancer. He's got terminal cancer. And his friend visits him and cries with him and prays with him. And as he's leaving, he shouts out to his Christian friend, Tom, you do know it will be all right, don't you? You do know it will be all right. How can that be? At your lowest moment of your life, when your life is, how can it possibly be all right? And Smeets takes the rest of that book to unpack that. And if I may, Krish, just in case you don't ask me another question on this book, there's a lovely bit in it where Smeets finishes his seminary training. He's about to take a pastorate. And he says to his old theology professor, give me something that I can, a bit of advice. I'm going into the pastorate. I'm going to be preaching lots of sermons. And his old professor said, Lewis, remember you're speaking to ordinary people. He said, sometimes I'm in church and I hear about the preacher talking about the oil running off Aaron's beard, and I imagine a woman fingering the lump she's just found in her breast. Or a man brushing away a tear because he's just been made redundant. Or a couple struggling with their teenager who's gone in trouble with the police. Lewis, remember you're speaking to ordinary people. And it's powerful, isn't it? And I've tried to take that on board.
That's fantastic. Cool. I want to go and buy that book. It may well be available in the bookshop, so you might need to raise someone for it. Rob, you've written a lot of books, but your latest one is called The Wisdom House, because you don't always have to learn the hard way. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, two things, really. We have 5 grandchildren. I was telling some people today, if I'd known grandkids were so much fun, I'd have had them first. And in case you weren't in our parenting seminar, I shared the secret. The reason grandparents and grandchildren get along so well is they've got a common enemy. But after my fourth grandchild was born, little Jackson, he was born about 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, and I'm shaving Sunday morning, and I've not seen this little boy. And suddenly my phone pings, and there's a photograph of him. And I'm just filled with this incredible desire to write Jackson a letter. Because I have learned many lessons the very hard way. Plenty of tears. And I've learned many from people far wiser than me. And I wrote him a letter, and I welcomed him to the world and said, Jackson, here's a couple of things. I know you can't read quite yet, but put this in the top drawer for some rainy day, perhaps long after I'm gone. And in my study, I've got two big armchairs. I sit in the one to the right of the fireplace. And suddenly in my mind's eye, Krish, I imagine my 5 grandchildren, not as the little ones they are now, but as grown men and women, sitting in another armchair. Somebody had broken their heart. Somebody had trod all of their dreams. They were tired of trying to please other people. And we would talk long into the night. And so I wrote to them all, The Wisdom House.
It's wonderful. If you've not read a Rob Parsons book, then you're in for a treat. The way that Rob speaks with his warmth and his energy just really comes through on every page. And how about this for an endorsement? William Paul Young, who is the author of The Shack, which sold about 23 million copies and had just been made into a major Hollywood movie. He had a 2-word summary of Rob's book, simply brilliant. So if you haven't read it, it's recommended to you.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic. Let's invite Christy to join us.
Yeah, great.
We'll get to talk about some of your books as well. Could you give a very warm welcome to Christy Wimber? For those of you that don't know, Christy's been part of the Vineyard movement since its very beginning, and you share a very famous surname. Tell us about the Wimber connection.
Oh, no, I was not married to John Wimber. That would make me very, very old. I'm married to Sean Wimber, which is his best-looking son, actually. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can say that.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
It's good you're saying that, otherwise we could be in trouble.
I know.
And you're an itinerant speaker, but you're also a pastor. And tell us about where you make time. Pastoral ministry is incredibly demanding. Traveling is difficult. How do you make time for reading?
Well, I also have 2 children. So I have a daughter who's married, and she's 25, and I have a son who's 17. So I had them 10 years apart so she could raise him. So that's one of the reasons why I can do what I can do. And I think you have to make time. I think I'm most powerful, I think, as a minister after I've been ministered to. And I think just my personal time, my personal reading, my personal investment in my own soul is what helps me do what I do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Except hold up mics. I'm not very good at that. But other than that.
That's very good. And do you have a particular time of the day, or how does the rhythm of reading work?
I do, actually. Well, I have just certain things that I do in the morning and at night that are very important to me, just to feed my soul in different ways. And I wouldn't call them. I think they start out as disciplines, but I think they turn into just a life-giving relationship, honestly. And so yeah, I do that, even if I'm on the road.
Yeah.
It's very important to me, yes.
And do you have a preference about whether it's a physical book you read or reading like a Kindle on your phone or a separate device? How do you feel about that stuff?
Yeah, I'm really old school, actually. Like, I love having the book. I love writing in books. I love even writing in my Bible, which some people find very difficult. But I love just having something tangible, you know?
Tell you what, let's do a little vote. Hands up if you read regularly on a digital device in preference to reading physical books. Hands up if that's you. Interesting. Okay. Hands up if you're always going to read physical books. That's just your preference.
I knew I liked you. See, I thought, I'm going to like these people.
It turns out you match the national statistics. It seems like, apart from reading websites, when it comes to reading actual long-form books, most people are reading as you are. So a lot of people have decried, they said it's the end of the physical book, but actually e-book sales are nothing compared to physical book sales, which is a problem for me, because in my household, I've used all the shelf space, and some of those books are 2 or 3 deep, which is problems. My wife has now said that I've got a 1 in, 1 out rule, which is really tough. but it doesn't apply to digital books. So that's why I try to read more of those. But, oh, we've got some lovely classical music wafting in from somewhere. Thank you for that. I don't know who's playing that. If there's a way to... It's not you? Okay. Could you tell us about one of the books that shaped your life early on?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that when I read something, I love the latest thing that I'm reading, and then I'll go back to certain books that really have impacted me. I would say early on, you know, because I grew up in the vineyard, I would have to say, I would almost be, it's almost sacrilegious not to say, John really did impact me, John Wimber, and Power Healing really impacted me in particular. But I think like as I grew in my own sort of study, man, there's just too many to count, because there hasn't been one in particular that I'm like, man, that's actually changed my life, except in recent years. In recent years, I've read a few that have just really impacted
Tell us
me.
about one of those.
They've had more to do with the soul. They've had more to do with one of the ones I picked, which was Emotionally, Spiritually Healthy. I just find those books incredibly important, not even just for the leader, but for the believer, because I just feel like we're so surface living all the time. And for me, I had to really learn how to go deeper. So I felt like that book really walked me through it. Actually, several of his books, but that one in particular.
Tell us the name of the author for that, sorry.
That's Peter Scazio, just something like that. It's on, I'm holding it, but I have too many books.
Oh, let's see. I'll grab it for you. Yeah, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality.
Yeah, super great
by
book.
Peter Scazzero, or Scazzero.
Yeah.
It's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. That's on offer at the moment, actually, on the bookshop, £7.99. Tell us, what is it that spoke to you from this book, do you think?
Well, I started reading it, and at the same time before that, I started writing a book myself. And so I had looked at this a few years ago, kind of put it aside, wrote the book that I wrote, went back to this, and went through it a few times. That'll tell you how powerful it was. It just so drove me crazy. But it just hit places in me that needed to get hit.
Yeah.
And so I read it actually 2 or 3 times, then went back to it again and read it, and then read a couple of its other ones. So just the last, really honestly, 2 to 3 years, that's a process.
Very good.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the audience a question in a minute, but tell us about your latest book that you've got out.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Transformed. Sorry, I just grabbed all these books. I just wrote this. I had a conversation with the Lord, and I saw this thing where the Lord began to break down Romans 12 for me. And some of the things that I get asked about on the road constantly are pretty consistent. And when I began to break down Romans 12 and what it looks like to live our life in worship and in mercy, and having our mind renewed, which is massive, to knowing God's will. And within that, there's just several things that I come across all the time in different areas in life, in ministry, being a woman in leadership. I mean, I could just go on and on that really hit from Romans 12. So I just began to break that down, and that's honestly what it is.
That's great. I often like reading books that have been field tested on the road.
Yes.
Because you know they've had a resonance with someone.
Yeah.
And I find when I try to write a book, I'm often trying to answer those questions that have been asked again and again.
Yes.
Because you know those are things that people are grappling
Yeah.
with. So I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Yeah.
Is it available already?
Yeah, it just got launched, I think, last week. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I really hope is that it breaks the illusion that all is easy. And that even in ministry or on the stage or just different things, it looks like all of life is easy.
Yep.
And it's just not. You know, it's quite painful sometimes, quite difficult. So that's what I hope, and people find freedom in that.
Fantastic.
So yes, it's out.
Here's a question for you, just around your tables or with someone near you. How do you discover new Christian books to read? How do you find out what the next book you're going to read is? What's your normal mechanism? How would you describe that? Maybe look back over the last couple of books that you came across. How did you become aware of them? Let's hear from you in a minute. Let's talk around our tables, and we'll come back in just a few seconds. Okay. I'd love to hear from you. You might have to shout a bit. I don't think our microphone goes long enough, but I'll try and repeat it. Someone want to share how you discover your Christian books? What are going to be the books you're going to read next? How do you come across them? Yeah. Shh. Oh. That's good. So if you've read a book, are you one of those people that reads the footnotes and sees other books that have been recommended? Is that, hands up if that's you, are you that kind of person? Do you read the footnotes? Yeah, very good, excellent. Yes, please. Oh, now we're talking. So I just have to repeat this for honesty. But this gentleman's lovely, very wise niece came across one of my books and recommended it to you. And have you read it, sir? Oh, there you go. Very good. Excellent. There are some lovely books out there, some of mine too, so I need to meet your niece and thank her very much. Wonderful. Anyone else got a method? How do you come across new books? How do you discover new things to read? No? Okay. I was chatting to Steve Barnett, who's one of the guys that runs St Andrew's Bookshop and runs the bookshop here this week, actually. And he's saying we've somehow lost the tradition of maybe our church leaders recommending books. It's becoming rarer, and it could be because of the pressures on leadership, that there isn't enough time for them to read, and so therefore they're not recommending so many. But every single Christian leader that I meet tells me that books have been absolutely formative in their life. Whether they're a Christian leader in kind of full-time paid Christian ministry, or whether they're a Christian leader in politics or arts or education, all of them will testify that they wouldn't have been the Christian they are today without books in their life. And so that's where the Books for Life idea came from. If we could interview a whole bunch of Christian leaders and get them passionately talking, not just about their own books, we all love our own books, but could they talk about other books that have helped them? And so if you go online, you can see we've done 6 interviews so far. Canon J. John was the first one. Andy Croft, who's from Soul Survivor, was the second one. And a whole bunch of others. And we've got a new season kicking off soon. And the first person we've interviewed is a guy called Philip Yancey. Hands up if you've read a Philip Yancey book. Yes, good to hear. So he's brilliant, and he talks with great passion about many, many books. Now, let's talk to Rob. Tell us about another book that you've been reading recently that's particularly helped you.
You know, the fascinating thing about being an author is when somebody else writes a book, you think, oh, I wish I'd written that. Because and this is a book actually by one of our colleagues called Catherine Hill. And she's written this incredible book on parenting. She's called it, If You Forget Everything Else, Remember This. And what I like about it is it's short, very short chapters, brilliant cartoons, and I think I call it a contents list to die for. Things like speak words of life, quality against quantity time, we always, you know, the power of traditions in our family, boundaries give security, how to let them go, something Catherine calls parenting with elastic. And I think actually we're looking for books sometimes, Chris, to read ourselves, but also to give to people. If we're grandparents, to give to children who've had a first child, or when someone's had a baby, and I think it's just an absolutely brilliant book, and I love that one. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, Catherine is here on site working with you each morning. If you're not up for the big top gathering to talk through some of the more tricky issues that are facing the church, Rob and Catherine are running a fantastic seminar series around parenting, and she's an amazing lady, lovely communicator. And a recommendation from you comes very strongly. I think I've given away more of your books than anybody, than any other author, because they're so helpful. So it's great to hear of another resource to give away.
And you know, Chris, if I could say that, and you read that book as well, didn't you? Yeah. Sometimes we write books, so as I do, that are overtly Christian. And then you write other books that are full of Christian truth, but you know you can give them to anybody. And I think that book is in that category, which is why I so like it. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Christy, tell us what you made of that book.
Wait, say that again?
What did you make of that book? You'd read it.
Oh, yeah, no, I love it. I love anything that brings, well, first of all, it's on parenting, so I think it's very helpful just to know you're not crazy. I think that's very helpful. And to have some things that are just tools that are right to the point, that have a bit of humor in them. So I think that's funny. I think that's
very good. I've got a controversial question. We're going to do, again, a little bit of polling with the audience. Someone told me yesterday that they don't think men, Christian men in particular, read many books, Christian books, written by women. But what do you think? Is that true? Do you agree with that? And what can we do to change it? Christy, what do you make of this? You're a woman, you're an author. Do you think it's true? Do you think there's anything we need to change?
Well, I've never really thought about it because I am a woman, always have been, always will be. So I don't think of it like that. I write like how I preach. So I lead a church, so I need men, women, and children. So I preach to all. So I do hear that, though, because I think that there's probably an element of, oh, it's a woman, and so it's probably going to be touchy-feely. I'm not like that at all. I probably should be more, put it that way. But I think it's probably more of an assumption in ways, and probably something that we could probably just work towards. Even the marketing, I think, sometimes is helpful and things like that, where it's just communicated clear the topic and actually what it's about, and because not all authors actually teach as well, so you can't really hear how they're coming across.
That's really helpful. One of my favourite female authors, well, she's one of my favourite authors, never mind she's a woman, is Paula Gooder. And Paula Gooder is someone who writes with deep biblical knowledge. She's a great communicator. By the grace of God, no one's tried to put flowers or necklaces on her books, so hopefully that's going to help some of us guys to not write it off. But I can recommend anything that she's written, actually. She's a fantastic communicator. Tell us about some of the books that have helped you.
Yeah, I think just in my journey along the way, some books that have been incredibly helpful at different seasons. I think Bonhoeffer is one of my favorite, actually, of all times. But he wrote a book called Life Together on Community. And I think being in the church, I think especially you have to fight to be in church, stay in church. I think that's a really wonderful book, especially if you're struggling in church, to understand the importance of community. I think anything on Simon Ponsonby is wonderful. I think he's not just a brilliant communicator. He's just very, very good at writing. My friend Rick Warren, he's great on church. I think if you're a church leader, I think, you take the parts that are really helpful in building the church. I think he's really, really brilliant. I think he's anointed, actually, in building of the church.
Wait. You just dropped it in there. Rick Warren is your friend.
Yes.
So you've got to tell us a Rick Warren story then.
No.
He's one of the Christian authors that's had the best sales of books anywhere in the world. As far as I work out, he could be a multi-millionaire on the books that he's written, but he lives very simply, doesn't he?
Yes.
Refuses to, I think he's got a 90% tithe going on in his life, which is great. So tell us a Rick Warren story now that you've dropped in that you might know him personally.
To be honest with you, yes, I think Rick tells enough of Rick's own stories about all of that. He's very public about all of it, but I can say they're the real thing. And I think that's what's really important is they actually live what they write. I think probably out of all of my closest friends, great models in every kind of way, but especially in the church. And that's why I recommend his church, because I think you can learn from different movements, you can learn from different churches, you can take the best, kind of spit out the bones sort of thing. And I really admire people that live what they're writing and live what they're teaching. And so Rick and Kay are definitely that.
It's great.
So.
This little book, Life Together, our church, I'm part of a small Baptist church plant in Thame, just outside of Oxford. And we've been experimenting with using books as the backbone of a teaching series. So for the past 8 weeks, we've been trying to use some of Bonhoeffer's Life Together as the curriculum for our church. Our church has people that are very, very brainy, so we've got kind of an Oxford professor, but we've also got people that have been recently converted, not in work, made unemployed, people that used to live on the streets. So it's quite a challenging communication task, taking some of Bonhoeffer's writing, which is very profound, and making it accessible. But we've tried experimenting with kind of live blogging as well. So we're looking at this book, and so here's a few reflections that might help you with that. But we're just trying as a church to change the culture on reading, because books are even more fun when you're reading with other people, because then you can say, what do you make of that? I didn't understand that. Let's talk together. So, I really recommend this book. It is tough, but it's short. So it's kind of like a really high-intensity workout that's really good for you. I'll tell you what we're going to do now. I'm going to try this. This is it. The whole thing is an experiment, so everything's up for grabs. I wonder if we could do a book surgery for you. So maybe that you would like some recommendations. It could be for a friend that's going through a difficult situation. It could be for you as you're trying to wrestle with what to read next, and you recognise some challenges that you're facing in your life. You'd like some books into that. So just around the table, see if you can help us come up with some questions that we can give you some book recommendations for. Does that make sense? Have a little go on that. We'll talk together, see if we can come up with one as well, and we'll see if we can help you with some book recommendations. Great. Oh, good, great. So we're looking for recommendations about mental health, and not simplistic ones that just say God's in charge. We want some nice, meaty, solid stuff on that. Anything you could recommend?
I actually work with mental health now. I have a lot of passion for it, especially in the area of healing. And so I've listed on our site at wimber.org, there's a whole list of specific books that deal with mental health for people that not only struggling, but people that are caring for people. Really fantastic and foundational, and tried and proven. Also psychiatric as well, but also again, the Warrens. I mean, they're fantastic with mental health, and so there's lots of equipping tools there. So I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, there's a tremendous need for that. I don't think we deal with those kind of issues very well often in the church. We sometimes deal with them well, but basically if you break a leg, people will bake a cake. But anything from the neck up is a bit more difficult often. And I've got a book here that I have loved by Wayne Cordew called Leading on Empty. He was a pastor, and this is how he puts it. It was a balmy California evening. I'd gone for a jog before I was to speak at a leadership conference. I can't recall how I got there, but I found myself sitting on the curb, weeping uncontrollably. I couldn't tell if it took place suddenly or gradually, but I knew something had broken inside. I remember lifting my trembling hands and asking out loud, what in the world is happening to me? And many of us have been through experiences like that, and I think books that take the lid off, not with clever answers, but to let us know we're not alone. You know, Christian and Chrissy, I think we can get through lots in life if we know we're not alone, that others have been through that path, and I think that book does that.
That's really good. If you remember the film Shadowlands with Anthony Hopkins playing C.S. Lewis, there's a quote there that is attributed to C.S. Lewis, but no one can find any time that he said it. But the quote in the film was, we read to know that we're not alone. And so that is exactly what happens, isn't it? If you've read a book, a biography maybe, where someone's been wrestling with these things, that's very helpful. I think Will van der Hart's got a book around the mental health issue. His stuff around mind and soul is very helpful. And Catherine Welby Roberts, who's speaking for me, her book is forthcoming. So watch that space there. Brilliant. Has anyone else got a scenario they need some recommendations for? I'll go here and I'll come to you next. Yep. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was Catherine Hill's book. If you forget everything else, remember this. If you forget everything else, remember this. Yeah.
That is available here, and Catherine's here, so she will sign it for you. So make the most of that. Good. Okay, at the back there. Yep.
Any recommendations about gender fluidity in the modern society? How gender is now no longer concrete. Some origins, some arguments from either side.
Yeah, Chrissy, that would be good for you to answer.
Chrissy was very clear that she's born a woman, you're going to be a woman, you always will be a woman. So that's right. Okay, that's very clear. I haven't read it yet, but there's a new book by Glyn Harrison called A Better Story. He's a clinical psychologist, and he's trying to wrestle with this whole issue around gender and gender fluidity. It is on the bookstall. I know Glyn, he's a lovely guy, but I haven't read the book, so I'm assuming it's going to be pretty useful. Anyone else got any recommendations on that subject?
I just can't remember the name of the book. There was a very helpful one, but honestly just can't off the top of my head remember that name of it.
The other person to watch out
Oh, this lady can remember it.
on that subject, is Sam Albury. I've been enjoying his work. He's particularly looking at same-sex attraction, but I think he's also writing or has spoken about the issue of gender as well. So he's a very interesting guy, single guy, but is very open about his own same-sex attraction issues. So, yes, did you have one? Yeah, yeah. Great. Excellent. So we're being recommended Vaughan Roberts' book called Transgender. So Vaughan Roberts is the pastor at St Ebbe's Church. He's also the president of the Proclamation Trust. So he's coming from a conservative background, but he very courageously was open about his own same-sex attraction. And again, these two things are connected, but they're not the same. But we're just recognising that people who have been open about wrestling in this area are writing into these spaces. So thank you for that. Great. Has anyone else got a subject or a dilemma you want us to try and help with books? Charlotte, go on. Excellent. It's great. It's good to see Charlotte. Charlotte and I were at the same university at the same time. It feels like a reunion. I was with Nathan this morning. He was at the same youth group as me. And it's good to see Charlotte, good friend of my wife. So we're looking for a book or a series of books aimed at leadership in the workplace, particularly if we're talking like a secular workplace context. Has anyone got any recommendations? Oh, yes, please. John Maxwell, so big leadership thinker, often really helpful, really widely read outside of the church. He's good. Obviously, anything by Mark Green has been fantastic. The whole work that LICC have been doing, Fruitfulness on the Front Lines, their kind of latest initiative, packed full of really helpful advice there. I think there's a book I came across from a Canadian author, and it's called Taking Your Soul to Work. I think that's a really good book. I guess my favourite book in this space is Tim Keller's Every Good Endeavour. If there's only one book you read about living for Christ in the workplace, I think that would probably be my major recommendation. It is available in the bookstore. I am a Tim Keller fan, but that is an excellent book. Has anyone else got a recommendation on this subject? Yes, Catherine? Yes, good. Rob won't say it, that's good. But Rob's book, The Heart of Success. Tell us about that book, Rob. What inspired you?
Yeah, well, that's one of the books which I wrote really for the general market. And I suppose I troll over my life as a lawyer and business, and we had quite a big legal consultancy where we spoke to lawyers all over the world, really. And just some principles of balancing home and work life, how to deal with people in the office life, how to deal with difficult people, how to discover your strengths, what kind of value should companies have, those kind of things. And that book did pretty well. It got on the Sunday Times business bestseller list and took me all over the world and speaking on it. In fact, about 3 years ago, the president of Swaziland invited me in to speak to him and the whole of his cabinet for an hour on The Heart of Success. That was fun. So I think that might be on the bookstall. Yeah.
Excellent. That deserves a round of applause. That's very exciting. So, Charlotte, the president of Swaziland has a recommendation for you. The Heart of Success. Very good. How do you possibly follow that? Good. Anyone else got a dilemma before I give these guys some last orders of books they would like you to read? Any other book dilemmas you want to raise? Let me ask you a question then. If you've got a friend who's not yet a Christian but wants to explore the Christian faith, what are your go-to books at the moment that you would consider giving away? I'm looking around your tables and see if you can come up with 3 recommendations each. What are your best books that you've got to give to someone who wants to explore the Christian faith? Could you have a go at that? Let's see how you get on. Yes, please. Yep. Okay, Brian Draper's book Soulfulness, published last year by Hodder. If you go on the Books for Life Live website, he's got a little 20-minute talk about that. And that is a great book for people who are spiritually aware, but not yet Christian. So really helpful, very good. Anyone else got another recommendation? Yes? Yeah? Okay. So this lady said the Eldridges, John and Stacey Eldridge, captivating is good for some. Let me be open. I think it's good for some women. Some women might really struggle with the gender role assumptions that she makes, that men are the heroes and women need rescuing. but there are some women that will connect with, so I hear you there. I hope that wasn't too undiplomatic. Yes, please. Yes, John Pritchard was the Bishop of Oxford. I think he's just retired, isn't he? But he writes some very accessible books to help people in the early phases of their Christian life. And it's got a lovely tone about him. He's great. Anyone else? Yes, please. Yes, Francis Spufford, Unapologetic. Now, I need to make an apology for this book. So, if your friend is a Guardian reader, this is probably the best book to give them. But if you're a little bit nervous about language, it's the first apologetics book that has the F-bomb in it. I mean, let's be honest about that. That's quite a statement. So certain people that will be great for others it won't. But I think he's amazing. I really, really like him. Good. Anyone else with a recommendation? Good book to give away to someone exploring faith. Let's ask Rob and Christy what they would give away.
Okay, well, I've been spending some time recently with a GP, actually. Very, very bright man, but very arrogant. And I wouldn't say a militant atheist, but very, very sure of himself. And I lent him Lennox's book, God's Undertaker. Lennox is a fascinating guy. I first saw, I know John Lennox well. I was on a teaching team with him for a while in Cardiff. But I saw Lennox debating Dawkins in Alabama. And I think Richard had a look on his face after about the first 10 seconds that at least said, I'm in a fight. And he was. Lennox is professor of mathematics, and he understands probability. And I gave it to my friend, and I think it will really at least make him think, which is an incredible step. So it's John Lennox, God's Undertaker. And then there's Alistair McGrath, what is it, The Dawkins Delusion, which I thought was a brilliant book.
I give away several things at different times because it depends on who you're ministering to, I think. And if I would say, because we're coming into Easter, I do think The Case for Easter is a small booklet, is fantastic, really, really thorough, but simple to read, especially for it. He's just brilliant the way that he communicates. But I also think you got to find out where the person's at, and you got to find out what they'll actually respond to. And ask the Lord, what's gonna help them, because I just think there's so much variety out there now that I think if you give something too big to somebody, I do think that's a little overwhelming if they don't know the Lord in particular. So, but I found that to be very helpful. Just The Case for Christ. This is who God is. This is what He's done for us. This is what it's all about. This is why we live the way that we live. I think that's very helpful.
And coming to a cinema near you soon is the movie based on this book, The Case for Christ. And so it looks quite well done, actually, surprisingly. Some Christian movies come across better than others. Just a funny story. I heard of a guy who was given... Do you remember Josh McDowell? Is that a name that you remember? Remember he had these 2 volumes, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And someone was asking some questions, so their friend brought them these 2 huge volumes, and they went away. He's broken it down, it's in smaller versions now. So they came back a couple of weeks later and said, yep, I'm convinced, I believe. And they said, oh, which argument was it that convinced you? And they said, oh, I didn't read it, but the fact there were 2 volumes, that was enough. So maybe there is an argument, sometimes a big book could be helpful. I still give away C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. It's not for everybody. The language is quite quaint sometimes, but he is just the master of the illustration and the allegory, and that's very powerful. I think for children, I would still use the Narnia books. I think they're a great introduction into these things. But it is good, isn't it, to be thinking not just of what's good for me, but other books I can give away, and having a stock. A friend of mine runs a car dealership in the Wirral. He knows Rob very well, and he's got on his shelf like loads of books. Some of them are Rob's books, a couple of mine, and he's always looking either to his business colleagues or his clients, who can I give a book to that would appreciate this and it would help me in my conversation with them. So it's a really, really good ministry. Okay, our time is nearly up. I'll give these guys last orders, and then I want to ask you one favour before you go, and then we'll release you. But any last book you want to recommend that you haven't had a chance to say anything about?
Okay, this is a book by a woman, Dr. Elizabeth McNaught, and I've just read it in the last couple of months. Elizabeth is a GP but for most of her life, she suffered with anorexia. And it's a most honest book. It's an incredibly moving book. Some of the medical profession struggled with her, I think being a GP, admitting that she suffered with an eating disorder, because I think she believes in some way she has to deal with it for the whole of her life. There's a most moving time when she's about 14, and she's a little, quite overweight, and the parents decide to move her to a new school. And she's excited about that, and she walks into a new class and a new life is about to begin, and a boy turns around and says, "Hello, fatty." And so her trauma begins again. It's an incredible book. I think she got on Newsnight the other day talking about it. It was serialized in one of the newspapers. So Life Hurts, A Doctor's Personal Journey Through Anorexia by Elizabeth McNaught. I think this one may be on the bookstores.
Yeah, I was just sharing with Krish a bit before because there's a book that really did impact me about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, called Repenting of Religion. And the guy's name is Greg Boyd. I don't know if it's in there actually, but it is fantastic on the subject of what we're doing at this event this year on unity, and actually just giving a clear picture of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and really how much God loves us. It's really, really wonderful, and it deals with us as the church and how we as the church see the world. Very, very great read. Also, there's another book. I'm just going to do this because I just think this is so helpful. Is that anything by Ponsonby? I'm just going to say Simon Ponsonby. I'm not just saying this because he's my friend. I'm not just saying who all my friends are. I'm just saying Ponsonby's just brilliant, and he wrote a book. If you're wanting to learn about the Holy Spirit, he wrote a book called More. I'm sure it's in there. It's really helpful. Just fantastic writer, don't you think? That really, really, that book in particular, and on worship, which worship is one of my favorite things, but he wrote a book called Now Unto Him, and it's fantastic on the area of worship. So there you go, bit broad. Yeah. So.
Fantastic. Great. Well, just before we go, one little thing. This is the first time we've ever done this. You are, I'd like to say you were guinea pigs, but you've been so much better than guinea pigs. So if you've enjoyed it, give us a cheer. Excellent. Have a wonderful afternoon. Good to see you.